this might relate to something that I've made mention of in this podcast a number of times, that
Mm-hmm.
when we deal with land, it's not just by international convention. We need to enter into the philosophy of the people, because that is where
Yes.
I'm going to just now to ask you, in that we look at how many multinational companies deal with lands and landed property in Africa. Some of them, particularly those that are dealing with exploration, they don't have respect for the land. And this probably might be explained by the fact that they do not really care about the land because they are not from this part of the earth. It doesn't care what happened to them. A good example would be how Shell BP treats the Niger Delta. Now,
Mm-hmm.
assuming Shell BP find this oil in Europe, will they treat it the same way? Will they treat the land the same way they treated the Niger Delta? The answer is obviously no. Because I've made this
Mm-hmm.
argument before, it's one of my books, that it is not right. You don't need to say, because the people don't have the power to be able to hold you accountable for this, you do whatever you like. It means you are not mature. Because if you want to go
Yes.
into the dealing with people, you don't say because they cannot hold you accountable for that, you just kill them, treat them like animal. You need to know that you are dealing with human being. Now, on the other way,
Exactly.
if we were to flip the argument round, say Shell BP was an oil company owned by the people of the Niger Delta, would they treat the land the way they treated the Niger Delta? The answer also is no, because they know
No.
that if they do that, they are destroying their land and they are destroying their existence. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that if we don't explain who owns the land, if we don't explain this issue very well, it becomes very
Mm-hmm.
easy for somebody to come from somewhere and do whatever he like. But this is wrong. So the question I want to ask you to get to that point now is, what really is our understanding of the land, speaking from the point of view of many African countries, for example, or many African people? Because from a point of view of country, we must still go back to the European Convention, to the Western Convention, because of course, many of the countries in Africa got independent not too long ago. So that is not where our history
Yes.
started from. So when I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what is our understanding of the land, I'm talking of the people who have been there before the European came to Africa.
Our understanding of land has been very clear from the beginning. Our grandparents knew what land means. Our parents knew what land means, and they know what land means to them. And the unfortunate part is that we tend to have an educational system that tends to divert attention from the core issues. It devalues the value of land. It does not emphasize the value of land to the African person, and it does not talk about the real history of the African person for them to understand why, when, and where, and what makes them to be what they are today. So it has to deal with the very fact that our people deliberately, by design, have been made to undervalue the value of land, to think that having land is something that is not of importance to them as long as they are not a farmer or they are not farming. It has made them to focus on the crumbs, whilst the main meal is left untouched. And the other thing is, it all boils down to the legislation, the lawfare that we've been talking about. You'll understand that the core issue is that whenever all our African countries fought for their independence, they had to negotiate for their constitutions. And who were the major brokers of those negotiations for those constitutions? Now, whenever you want to talk about land, they raise the constitution, they talk about the rule of law. Whose law, by the way? They talk about property rights. Whose property rights? Whose rights? And you understand that you cannot address those inequalities, those structural inequalities, those historical inequalities, those factual inequalities, without addressing the laws that pertain and revolve around those same matters. So the challenge that we have is our educational system. It is our legal system. I mean, when I'm saying our legal system, I mean the way our people have been schooled in terms of the law. What is it that we talk about when we're talking about the law? What is it that we talk about when we're talking about justice? What is it that we talk about when we're talking about economics? There is no economics, my brother, which without factoring the land in it. The problem is our Western trained economists, they think that economics must be administered and be monitored and managed in the perspective of the Western mindset. What about the African mindset? We're talking about the same lawfare which introduced paper money to the African, and whilst the African was made to focus on the paper money, the colonialist focused on the real money, which was gold. They took all the gold to Europe, whilst the African men pursued the paper money, which is used and perishes with the using. We can talk about, for example, my brother, when we're now talking about these matters, I can give you two vivid examples. The first example is that one of how South Africa got to be colonized. And the second example is that of how Zimbabwe got to be colonized. You'll find that South Africa was colonized by a company called the Dutch East India Company, which was led by Jan van Riebeeck in 1652. And Zimbabwe was colonized by the British South Africa Company, which was led by Cecil John Rhodes and his right man Jameson. So these two countries, great countries in Southern Africa, were colonized by companies which had the Royal Charter. Whose Royal Charter? The British Royal Charter. So who was spearheading the colonization of Africa? The same people who are parading themselves as the benefactors of Africa. The same people who are parading themselves as the saviors of the world. The very same people who are parading themselves as the champions of human rights and the preservation of property rights now today. They are the same people who we had to oversee these two companies which colonized Africa and resulted in the introduction of taxes. Do you know that the African people were taxed? Some of the taxes are so ridiculous. The heart tax, the poor tax, the dog tax, the road tax. In your own country, being taxed by someone who has come from Europe, you just being taxed for owning a hat.